It was one of those mornings where the airport felt like a buzzing hive of stress, chaos, and hurried footsteps. People rushed through terminals with rolling luggage, some clutching coffee cups while others frantically checked their phones for gate changes. Among the crowd was Daniel Harris, a 34-year-old marketing consultant from Denver, who had been traveling non-stop for weeks. Daniel wasn't someone who particularly enjoyed flying, but this trip was important. He had booked his ticket well in advance, splurging just a little extra on an aisle seat in row 12. It wasn't first class, but it gave him a sense of control, room to stretch his legs, easy access to the restroom, and a bit of comfort for the long flight ahead. As he approached the gate, Daniel was already tired. He had been away from home for 3 weeks, and all he wanted was to finally get back to Denver to sleep in his own bed. Boarding was called, and he scanned his ticket, walked through the tunnel, and stepped onto the plane. The air was filled with that familiar mix of recycled air, faint coffee, and jet fuel. Flight attendants smiled and guided passengers toward their seats. Daniel made his way down the narrow aisle, counting rows as he went. 11, 12. Finally, he found it. But there was a problem. Someone was already sitting in his seat. It wasn't just anyone, it was a woman in her late 40s, dressed casually but neatly, wearing a cardigan and holding her phone. She had a tote bag on the floor and was comfortably leaning back, scrolling through her screen as if she had been there all along. Daniel stopped, looked at his boarding pass, and then at the seat number above. Row 12, aisle seat. No mistake. This was his. "Excuse me," Daniel said politely, adjusting the strap of his carry-on bag. "I think you're in my seat." The woman didn't look up right away. Instead, she sighed, finished typing something on her phone, and then glanced at him with a faintly annoyed expression. "Oh, this one." "Yeah, I'm sitting here," she said casually, as though it wasn't an issue. Daniel blinked. "Right, but this is my assigned seat. 12C. I booked it weeks ago." He held up his boarding pass to show her. The woman gave a half-smile and shrugged. "Well, I'm already sitting here, and I don't really want to move. Can't you just take another seat?" Daniel was stunned for a second. He wasn't usually confrontational, but this was not how things worked on airplanes. People had assigned seats for a reason. He glanced down the row. The window and middle seats were already occupied by 2 other passengers, who were awkwardly watching the exchange. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is my seat." "You'll need to move," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm. Instead of complying, the woman leaned back further, crossing her arms. "Look, I got here first. It's just a seat. You can sit somewhere else. There are plenty of open spots." Daniel's patience thinned. He looked down the aisle and saw that most of the seats were filling quickly. He had specifically paid for this seat, and it wasn't just about preference, it was about principle. At this point, the flight attendant walked over, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right here?" she asked politely. Daniel explained, "Yes, hi. I believe this woman is sitting in my seat. I'm 12C. The flight attendant turned to the woman. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass, please?" The woman huffed, rolled her eyes, and reluctantly pulled out her pass. The attendant glanced at it and nodded. "Ma'am, your seat is actually 25B, in the back of the plane." The woman's expression hardened. "Well, I don't want to sit back there. It's cramped, noisy, and I get motion sickness. This seat is better." The flight attendant's professional smile didn't waver. "I understand, but passengers are required to sit in their assigned seats. You'll need to move to 25B. The woman crossed her arms defiantly. "No. I already settled in here. Why can't he just move?" She gestured toward Daniel, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. Daniel felt his face heat up. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wasn't being difficult. He was simply asking for the seat he had paid for. "I'm not moving," Daniel said firmly, though his voice remained steady. "This is my seat, and I'd like to sit here." The flight attendant tried again, keeping her tone patient. "Ma'am, if you don't move to your assigned seat, we won't be able to depart. Please gather your belongings." But the woman doubled down. "This is ridiculous. I have just as much right to sit here as he does. Seats are all the same anyway." Passengers nearby began whispering, their eyes darting between Daniel, the woman, and the attendant. The tension was palpable. A man across the aisle muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable!" Daniel's patience was wearing thin. He was tired, frustrated, and shocked at the entitlement on display. Still, he held his ground. "I paid extra for this seat. I'm not giving it up." The situation escalated when the flight attendant called over her supervisor. The supervisor, a tall man with a calm demeanor, approached and assessed the scene quickly. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. The woman immediately launched into her complaint. "This man is making a big deal out of nothing. I just wanted to sit here, and he's being difficult about it. Why can't you just let me stay?" The supervisor listened patiently, then turned to Daniel, who explained his side. After hearing both, the supervisor nodded firmly. "Ma'am, I need to be very clear. You must sit in your assigned seat, or we cannot take off. If you refuse, we'll have to escort you off the plane." That statement finally shifted the atmosphere. A few passengers clapped lightly, while others nodded in approval. The woman's face flushed with embarrassment, though she tried to hold her ground. "This is outrageous," she muttered, gathering her tote bag. With exaggerated movements, she stood up, glaring at Daniel as though he had personally wronged her. "Fine. You win." Daniel stepped aside, letting her pass. She stormed down the aisle toward the back of the plane, muttering under her breath. Once she was gone, Daniel finally slid into his seat. Relief washed over him, though he could still feel the tension lingering in the air. The passengers around him offered small smiles and nods of support. The man across the aisle whispered, "Good for you. Don't let people like that push you around." Daniel chuckled softly, though he was still shaken by the absurdity of it all. All he had wanted was to sit in the seat he paid for, and yet it had turned into a standoff. As the plane took off, Daniel reflected on the situation. It wasn't just about a seat, it was about standing up for what's fair. Too often, people gave in to avoid confrontation, but this time he had stayed firm. And while it wasn't pleasant, it sent a message: entitlement has consequences. For the rest of the flight, Daniel relaxed, listening to music and watching clouds drift by. The incident was already becoming a story he'd one day tell his friends and family. Maybe even a lesson about boundaries, fairness, and not giving in to unreasonable demands. What struck him most, though, was how quickly a small situation could spiral when someone refused to take responsibility. One person's entitlement had nearly delayed an entire flight. But with patience, persistence, and the support of those around him, the right outcome prevailed. By the time the plane landed in Denver, Daniel was exhausted but relieved.